Sunday night, it must be time for the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. I'm glad that you're able to be with us tonight. I hope you're able to stick around for the entire thing. But of course, if you're not, that is perfectly fine. We record everything, and you can go back during the week and you can check stuff out. The Bible Forum is a ministry of alternatives, biblical counseling, and education. It's a nonprofit 501c3 faith ministry. We exist by the good grace of God and by God's people who are willing to share a little something on a monthly basis. You can go to the website, it'll tell you what to do. PayPal is the preferred way, easiest way. But if you would rather send a check, just shoot me an email, thebibleforum@gmail.com, and I'll give you the mailing address and you can go that way. We've got some folks who like to do that. We have a full roster tonight, all kinds of stuff that we really need to talk about. You've no doubt got the email. I trust that you do get the email. If you don't, send me your email address. I'll put you on the list. Sometimes people decide they don't want to do it anymore. That's fine. We take them off. It's not a big deal. Just if you were interested, let me know, and we'll take care of that. But it spells out the kinds of things that we're going to talk about each evening or each Sunday evening. Tonight we're going to talk about stealing sermons. That's maybe passé in a lot of different ways, but I thought this was just over the top. I wanted to share it with you. What colleges are teaching their children about the founders of this country, primarily Christopher Columbus. Then there was an article about vampires for Jesus. I mean, that just threw me right off the edge of the cliff. We're going to take an extended look at those folks who are determined to mock God. A look at a feminist's advice to women, and a lawyer who's looking at the Judge Kavanaugh situation and analyzing Mrs. Ford's testimony. Then there's the question, who's actually raising your children? And finally, we'll look at a biblical concept. Is biblical prophecy being fulfilled today? We're going to talk a little bit about the Dead Sea and some of the events arising around that and all the rest of it. We also are open to your phone call if you'd like to jump in here and share something. The phone number is 843-666-1154, 843-666-1154. Wait till I tell you that the phones are open. You'll call in the middle of something, and it will be awkward on a lot of different levels. Let's get started. If you're all in your seats, the folks are gathered over at the chat room. People are ganging up there. A lot of the regulars have showed up. Maybe you'd like to be over there and see what they're talking about. They probably talk about you. Never know. Not really. They talk about me. Let's get started. This is the Bible Forum. It is Sunday night, October. First Sunday in October, believe it or not. October 7. And I'm Warren Sprouse. We're here every Sunday night to regale you with interesting and oftentimes challenging tidbits, things that show up in the news, things that people are talking about that tie back to what the Bible has said or the principles that guide the answers and solutions. And then we do talk a little more about Bible concepts, and tonight we're going to take a little bit of look at prophecy and some other things. But to begin with, there are a number of issues that are just interesting in light of where we are in the world and in God's economy. If you're like me, I'm a tightwad. I squeeze money out of, or pennies out of the nickels and try to make sure that I don't spend a lot. I'm not selfish. I like to share, but I'm very careful. And I'm not happy with the fact that we're having to pay $2.50 a gallon for gasoline. I don't understand why it's up that high. And we're being told now in the news, paper, whatever, different articles, that we can expect gas prices to go up. At the same time, we're being told that this country, this United States of America, produces more oil than any other country of the world. So why are the prices so high? Well, in part because we ship most of our stuff overseas. We're capitalists. We like to sell stuff. And it's their demand that's raising our prices. That and the fact that people like to make more money than they can make here. Am I the only one who doesn't understand why I have to pay more for oil, gasoline, so that others can have some? Is that selfish? This comes under the heading of too much information. I read recently that there are some more current guidelines relative to how much alcoholic beverages one could or should drink. And it's always a little bit disconcerting because the statistics come out, the logic seems to be there, and then it comes unglued at the end. For example, the new guidelines specify that 3 or 4 alcoholic drinks a week are non-offensive. You can't get hurt. 3 or 4 alcoholic drinks a week seems reasonable. But then in another study, we are taught that 4 glasses of wine a week will shorten your lifespan. 2 or 3 alcoholic drinks, and you know what that can mean. No offense, doesn't hurt you. 4 glasses of wine. Wine generally has a lower alcoholic content than those other fancy drinks. Will shorten your life. And I read that stuff and I only have one reaction. Duh. Got an article, actually an email just today from some faithful viewers, and they were commenting on the fact that the Roman Catholic Church wants, well, I think in what they were saying was, look at this is what they're doing. I'm saying this is what they've done for as long as I've been on the planet, I believe. They have a worship service every year, usually in the fall. I didn't realize it was connected to the October birthday of St. Francis of Assisi. But it is an outdoor worship service, a day that commemorates this particular church saint's transition from this life to the afterlife. And they do so by baptizing dogs. Francis is remembered for his generosity to the poor and his blessings to minister to lepers. What many people recall about Francis is his love of animals and nature. Now, I said they baptized him. That was sarcasm. But Duke Chapel in North Carolina has hosted a blessing of the animals since 1989. They call it a worship tradition. And it's made notable by the camels and other circus animals that are blessed every year at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. Apparently over the years, the ministers at this chapel have blessed animals ranging from hamsters to horses. I, on the other hand, believe that this thing in America goes back further than that. I remember in the late 70s, early 80s, an annual Roman Catholic blessing of dogs, animals, dogs, that kind of dogs, in Ocean City, New Jersey. We used to go down to Ocean City and we would go after Labor Day when it was cheaper. And we'd be there in October. They had their Oktoberfest, and it was like a second summer because it's fairly warm in New Jersey in October. And I was surprised. You go down on the boardwalk, and there at the end of the pier were all these people, a lot of dogs barking, and the priest was out there, and they were blessing the dogs. What is all this about? The scriptures described the act of blessing in terms of imparting power or imparting life to another. And the person performing the blessing is actually mediating that power from God or from Jesus to the person performing, or in this case, the animal involved. And to bless is more than an expression of goodwill and caring. To bless, biblically, is to impart God's power. The blessing of each animal by name means that health, healing, and life are being mediated from God for the benefit of the animal in its relationship with human partners. But it begs a question. Do animals have souls? Are those souls eternal? Ours are eternal. Do animals have eternal souls? And what is this power of life if it's not a spiritual life? Inquiring minds want to know. But usually when it's Roman Catholic, there's no logical explanation. I read an article this week in prophecynewswatch.com under the heading, "Just When You Thought It Couldn't Get Worse." It was an advertisement for a job. And here was a church that was looking for someone to be their pastor. The church is out in Colorado. And in the list of things they were looking for, it specified that the applicant needed to have the skills necessary to copy other people's sermons, that they might apparently deliver these things in their particular church. To be able to copy them word for word. Other popular preachers copy their sermons. The advertisement claims to have the funds necessary to make this a lucrative offer. And they already have a great praise team. All they need apparently is a skilled orator willing to plagiarize another man's sermons each week and deliver them. Does that surprise you? I mean, this is a contemporary church after all. And this so-called church indicated in their advertisement the similarity between that praise band playing popular songs as a Sunday music performance to the preacher doing the same kind of thing. Now, there is a technicality in all of this. One is that authors sit down, composers, and they write music. They write the music in order that others may use it, perform it. They get paid, but that's what it's all about. A sermon, on the other hand, is not just a rhetorical exercise, not a biblical sermon, not in terms of the church of Jesus Christ, but rather it is a unique presentation from the understanding, the intellect, and from the heart of one man as he is challenging, preaching, pointing his finger, and telling you that these are important concepts and you need to grab hold of these and you need to mimic or model these things. It's not just a rhetorical exercise to be acted out each Sunday, performed for an audience like music. It is supposedly intensely personal and specific to that congregation and that congregation's need. It is rooted in the presenter's own spiritual experience and understanding of the Word of God, not to mention his knowledge of the congregation's need. The idea that the Spirit of God is motivating and moving in and through not simply the delivery but the preparation of said sermon. None of that is present if you're just copying somebody else's work. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, the Apostle Paul laid out his preaching philosophy. And he says, "And I, brethren, when I came to you, came not with excellency of speech or of wisdom." He could have come with both. He was a very educated man, educated in the Scriptures. He said, "I didn't come like that, declaring unto you the testimony of God. For I determined not to know anything among you save Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling." Keep in mind, this was the days when Rome was persecuting the church, and so were the Jews. And he says, and in my speech and in my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. The power, the purpose of a sermon comes not from its rhetorical style, but rather the Holy Spirit's anointing. I must add that the advertisement has been subsequently removed. A woman by the name of Amanda Casanova, writing in a publication called Religion Today, just this week in October 2018, said, as of October 1st, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services policy now defines life as beginning at conception. She writes, the HHS accomplishes its mission through programs and initiatives that cover a wide spectrum of activities serving and protecting Americans at every stage of life, beginning at conception. Saying, quote, a core component of the HHS mission is our dedication to serve all Americans from conception to natural death. In June of 2018, Roger Severino, Director of Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights, speaking at National Right to Life Convention, said, our president is fearless when it comes to life and conscience, and we're just getting started. Now, up till now, none of that is new. But according to Newsweek, the Obama administration plan had identical language in its plan. However, the 2018-22 version simply adds the phrase beginning at conception. It's the language that President Trump has used in the past, and his administration is now correcting the document to reflect that reality. Earlier this year, President declared April Child Abuse Prevention Month, calling children a blessing from our Creator, and adding that they are endowed from conception with value, purpose, and human dignity. Isn't that amazing? On our college campuses, increasingly, Christopher Columbus is being charged with genocide. It seems he's responsible for killing off the indigenous people groups after landing in the Americas in 1492. Keep in mind, Columbus's landing, as best we can tell, actually was on a peninsula in Argentina. Or it could have been somewhere else up and down the coast. It changes periodically. But most everybody is convinced it wasn't here where we live. Prager University's Will Witt traveled to North Carolina recently to chat with students at Wake Forest University to get their take on this iconic figure and whether Columbus Day, October 8 this year, should be celebrated. And he asked the questions about Christopher Columbus. And the students were willing to answer the questions. One student said, Christopher Columbus, he sucked. He was a pretty terrible person. He kicked some foreigners out of their homeland, another guy said. When asked what year Columbus sailed, one student was certain that it was 1792, 300 years after the fact. When asked about the names of the three ships, and you have to keep in mind the questioner was wearing a shirt that announced all three names of those ships. And he said, can you name any of the ships? One student answered, I have no idea. A couple of students actually did have an idea. They said one of them was called the Mayflower. The consensus seemed to be that Columbus did a very bad thing and that the United States should give the land back to the natives, which they call Indians, since Europeans thought that this was India. One student suggested changing the holiday to Kicking Foreigners Out of Their Territory Day. Another student, who seemed very well versed in the history of Columbus and not a fan by any stretch of the imagination, needed a few seconds to answer if the U.S. should give back its land and get out. She said, well, we're still working on acknowledging that we had American slavery for 400 years. So I would advise baby steps. Did I tell you these were college students? The future of our culture. We'll come back to this concept a little bit later on. A lady by the name of Melanie Phillips, she's a British broadcaster, a journalist, and author. And she wrote recently that Western civilization has become unmoored from its core principles rooted in its foundational texts and biblical morality. At issue, she says, is the rise of secularism, multiculturalism, gender dysphoria, the breakdown of post-World War II political alliances, and the abandonment of common decencies. In terms of cultural and political standards, just where the line will now be drawn between political freedom and authoritarianism is anybody's guess. And meanwhile, there's Israel, the original ancient nation state founded upon the moral, social, and rational principles that sit at the very foundation of Western civilization. Who, she says, can be surprised, therefore, when Israel is the target of Western progressive venom? But for the same reason, Israel stands at the very center of the great struggle now underway to rescue Western civilization. It's time for Israel itself and the Jewish people worldwide to recognize and act upon this latest manifestation of Jewish destiny. And then there's the Vampires for Jesus. A recent article by a website that declares that it is Christian highlighted a man, an actor, who had played a recurring part in a TV show over a 5-year period. The article reports that this actor recently talked about his love for Jesus and his strategy for navigating Hollywood and the television industry while also maintaining his faith. The show Well, it's about vampires, it's about witchcraft, and all things viciously occultic. And this is from the website called ChristianHeadlines.com, drawn from an article from an Australian website entitled Insights, whose logo declares they exist to unite church. Now the question becomes, would a Christian try to kill somebody for entertainment? Well, would they act out as though they are killing people for entertainment? Would they want to play a character who does that sort of thing? Would a Christian torture someone for information? Would they want to play a character who does routinely? Would a Christian want to portray the demons of hell for money? Would a Christian use magical arts, immerse themselves in occultic practices, and then seek to entertain young people with these ideas? Would they pretend to be doing that for the same reason? Well, only if by Christian you mean one who goes to church, whatever that might mean. We're learning that young people today are far more likely than senior citizens to report being lonely and to report being in poor health. This survey surprised the survey takers. 20,000 Americans were surveyed, and the report was released just last Tuesday. On a scale of 20 to 80 years of age, young people, or 20 to 80 were the points, the score. Young people scored 44. That's over 50%. And the younger they were, the more lonely they scored. Generation Z, the ones that are now just coming into their own, 48%. Older people from age 39 to 72, older people, only 39% of them. Now I know old people have simply learned to accept their reality. But did you know that loneliness can make you ill? And it has the same mortality rate as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Loneliness. It's more dangerous than obesity, according to a 2010 report by the insurance company Cigna. They did not factor in opioids and all the heavy-duty stuff. Young people with the highest rates of social media are reporting very similar feelings of loneliness to those who barely use it. Face-to-face social interaction was seen as more healthy. Can you say duh? The article says, I have students who tell me they have 500 friends, but when they are in need, they readily admit there isn't anyone there. A former Surgeon General and physician by the name of Vivek Murthy is writing a book on the subject, and his research indicates, quote, stress from loneliness is an insidious type of stress, end of quote. It can lead to chronic inflammation, damaged tissue and blood vessels, and an increased risk of heart disease, arthritis, and diabetes. When people are disconnected at 16 or 18 years of age, it's not a spontaneously occurring event. It's an accumulation of all the events in that teenager's lifetime. It's an accumulation of the experiences in their family, along with any trauma they might have faced. Loneliness is dangerous. And our instant society, with all of its technology, is masking the loneliness. When it proves to be necessary, it won't be there for you. These are not real people on the other end of your Facebook. Not like the people who live next door, not like the people in your family, not like the people in your church. Think about it. As a culture, as a nation, we are in deep trouble and on the verge, the very precipice of something we have never, ever experienced in the history of the country and the history of the world. Do you see it? That's all I could do to keep from coughing. We got some folks lined up in the chat room. If you'd like to give me a call, the number is 843-666-1154. Theoretically, the phone will work, but if you do call, make sure you understand there's a delay, and you won't be able to do anything until I talk to you. Don't get too carried away. We've got a lot of other stuff. I don't know, again, if you get the email or not. Faithful viewers, this goes out to several hundred people, and they know. I have begun writing a little article with each one that goes out, and it's an article that flows from one or more of the things that we're going to be talking about. But we're going to talk about our effort in this country of mocking God. It seems we are determined to do that. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And it may surprise you. I've got a feminist that I ran across this week that is offering advice to women. That was interesting, educational. And then the big elephant that has sucked all the oxygen out of the room in the last couple of weeks is the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and the interview that the Senate committee had with Mrs. Ford from California giving her testimony. I want to take a look at that. I have found a lawyer who objectively goes at this as something they do for a living, giving some observation, which I thought was interesting. I think that the testimony the woman gave was compelling. I think that she was a sympathetic figure. I felt sorry for her. I could not understand why, after 30 years, it became an issue until I realized that she was going through therapy, psychological therapy, and having done some study on the various forms, types of psychological therapies, I can understand it. And then I realized that she was a student of psychology herself. Did you know that she has taught people how to beat the lie detector tests? It's one of the reasons they don't give them anymore. They're of no value. That was demonstrated back in the 70s, that this thing could go either way depending on what people were doing, how they felt, and things like that. It was not an exact science. Did not report the crime. Can't remember exactly where it was. Unclear as to who or how many were there. Didn't tell anybody about it at the party. Doesn't remember where the party really was. People who know her from that time tell different stories. It's really crazy. And it's sad. But we're going to talk about that a little bit. It might be helpful, might be educational. As you listen to the testimony of other people, or you understand how lawyers think and what it takes to present a case in court that is unimpeachable. And her case was completely impeachable, even though it probably did happen to her. We're also going to ask the question, who's raising your children? You can imagine what that's going to be like. I have a few little twists and turns in there as we go along. And then, as I mentioned before, at the end, I want to delve a little bit into biblical prophecy. We've got some folks out there, scientists, who actually are telling us that the Bible prophecies are being fulfilled relative to Israel and relative specifically to the Dead Sea. You do know the Bible speaks about the Dead Sea in the end days, that it won't be dead. You know that, right? I'll give you a hint. During the great millennial reign of Christ, there will be a temple, and out from under the temple, out from the doorway, under the lintel, not the door, the whatever at the bottom, will come a stream of water, and that water will run toward the Jordan River, and it will be about ankle deep when it starts, and it'll be a huge, raging, deep flow of water when it gets to the other side, but it will penetrate the Jordan River and flow south, and the Dead Sea will live. That's what the Bible says. Well, there are scientists now saying, hey, we're already finding life in the Dead Sea, pockets of life. And they even know what can happen that they could do right now that would encourage that. But Israel won't do it. The Messiah will. That'll be later on, at the end, if you're still awake. All right, I want to talk to you about a society, a civilization that is determined to mock God. If you have your Bible, you can go to Galatians chapter 6. We're going to be looking a little bit there later on. Hi, I'm Warren Sprouse. You're on the Bible Forum. It is Sunday night, the first Sunday in October 7th, 2018. We know that Western civilization is divided largely between Europe and the United States. Now, Europe has never really been all that the United States has been and is, both spiritually and morally. But now, over the last 70 years, the United States has been defining deviancy down. In so doing, we got a lot of names for it. We've got a lot of reasons for it. We've got some solutions for it. We complain about it, but it is all the same. Whatever it is, it's about mocking God. It's our attempt at mocking God. But you see, the Bible declares that such things are not possible. It is impossible to mock God. God will not be mocked. Case in point, increasingly we're seeing news reports of women who have been sexually molested by evil men. It happens at work, it happens in the home, it happens on the street. And often we're not told exactly what they did. We're not given the context in which it occurred. It's simply that he did it, and it's a crime. And the message we are being given from all of this is that women are vulnerable, often innocent victims, and men are brutal aggressors. Women are out there simply trying to make a living. And while they're doing that, men are taking advantage of them, taking advantage of that and of them. This particular article is stimulated by yet another woman, a wife, who has gone missing, with a distraught husband begging her to return. No one who knows her believes that she would simply leave her children. You remember the last time this happened? They found the children, they found the wife, all dead. He killed them and told this story. Is this another of the same? We don't know. But this is the way these things are set up. So we all know that men are naturally stimulated by the female form. They just have to see it. We all know that contemporary fashions feature the female form, often with a little peeky-poo. The culture encourages girls, young girls, to feature their forms. The music, the popular music, drives sexual desire. And if it's not doing that, it's at least stimulating emotions. Movies, TV shows, books, tweets, and so forth are dominated by sexuality. And my experience is that women are generally not aware of how their behavior stimulates sexuality. Often just being friendly. They don't get it. Now, I know there are women who get it, and they work it for their own benefit, but I'm just saying, 8, 10, 12, 14-year-old girl often doesn't get it. We know that men are pigs, and we know that young men are piglets, and pigs and piglets do what pigs and piglets do. When women enter the world of pigs, they have to know that things can happen. But more and more, women are naive. Even among the worldly wise, they don't get it. Years ago, I'm talking in the early 70s, 1970s, not 18, I watched a neighbor woman forced to go to work when her husband's business was ruined by the county. The county was widening a road, and right in front of his restaurant, they hit a sinkhole, and a telephone pole fell in the hole, and everything collapsed, and it took them 2 months or more to figure out what to do and get it fixed. And every day, that restaurant owner had to prepare a certain amount of food in case somebody came. He eventually went bankrupt. So this housewife, mother of 2, went to work. She worked in an office. And I gathered from the conversation she worked for a particular man, a boss. She was a secretary. And I had noticed that she dressed very nicely. And she was an attractive woman. She smelled good. And she purposed to get into the office early enough to make coffee before the boss arrived. She catered to his wishes, both in terms of work and personal, answering the phone or running errands or doing or whatever it had. She anticipated his needs, anything a good secretary would do. But after several months of this, she confided in me that this man was taking liberties, sweet-talking her, not overtly, but inappropriately touching, and caring about her, demonstrating his concern. And here she was in her mid-30s, mid to late 30s, she was conflicted, both at her boss's behavior and the fact that her husband didn't do any of this stuff. And underneath, she liked the attention she was getting from her boss, but she knew it was wrong. Now fast forward 57 years. In a culture that has decided men and women are equal, women are being abused, largely because they have not been taught who and what men really are. The music videos, the TV, the movies have painted a picture of sex-charged men as something virile and good. Great. Do the women not get it? Or are they simply compartmentalizing everything? I know women who think men are just like them, only with more muscles. And they tend to be shocked and offended when that man acts like a man. And of course, in all of that, it's the man's fault. To criticize a woman for dressing in a suggestive manner or being playful in a work environment or suggestive in a dating environment is, well, sexist. But sexism is real. And it gets played both ways. Only in the Bible are we warned about these things. The culture, the society, even the education system ignores reality. They want to put boys and girls in the same lavatories at school. Lavatories that have specially designed stalls that the walls reach all the way to the floor, and the children can lock them from inside, so that the teacher who's in the lavatory to make sure nothing untoward happens can't see what's going on in there. Does that make sense to you? It sure does to somebody. Only in the Bible are we taught the true meanings of sex and morality. And of all the books in the world, it's the Bible that we dare not live by, even in the church. Just look around. How many Bible versions are there? And why? In the English-speaking world, why do we need more than one? There are currently 950 by one estimation. And of course, the variances are defined in terms of readability. This one's more readable, or this one's more contemporary in its language. There are Bibles that have been created out of the liberalism that has attacked the church in the last 50 to 100 years. True to the original languages is the more intellectual reason for the differences. But the truth is that every Bible version that's on the market exists to change the way you view God's Word. A few have managed to actually capture that sentiment in valuable ways. But most of them simply exist to make money for the publisher. They're all copyrighted. The King James Version is one of the few, if not the only one, that isn't copyrighted. And most are actually corrupting God's Word for nefarious reasons. Why? Because human beings naturally hate God. Human beings naturally hate everything He stands for. Yeah, even the preachers. Have you seen how they live? The human heart, the prophet Jeremiah said, is deceitful. Well, how deceitful? Deceitful above all things. And it is desperately wicked. How wicked? It is more wicked than anything you can imagine, he says, under the inspiration of the Spirit of God. When you watch the news and you see all the hateful, disgusting, and truly sad things happening in a once decent culture, you're seeing what happens when that culture rejects God. In the past, Americans gave God lip service. That lip service, weak as it was, kept us safe. That lip service built solid families and a solid society, all of which is now gone. Today, every religious sentiment is equally valid. And if you don't think so, you're the problem, sweetheart. So what happens when you put a fox in the hen house? Or when you put a hen in the fox den? And you say, oh, we're not animals. No, we're not simply animals, operating according to instinct and desire. We are sentient creatures, made in the image of God. We know better. But the question is begged, do we? Are parents teaching objective morality today? I would argue they're not teaching much of anything, except how to live the way they're living by watching and seeing it. The average parent today is oblivious. Are parents parenting children? How many hours do parents and children spend together today? Not counting sleep time, which is about 60 hours a week. Not counting school time, which is at least 35 hours a week with travel. Not counting when parents are at work, which is 50 hours a week, counting the commute. Or when they're shopping or running errands or, well, you get it. We're talking about maybe 4 hours a day that parents and children maybe could spend together. And assuming the children want to be with their parents during these hours, there still isn't very much transfer going on. Children are observers, and they observe that parents just don't care about them. So what kind of parenting is taking place? What sort of imprinting of basic values or even individual values is taking place in the majority of our homes? Children are quick to learn. They learn all sorts of things. But one of the things they will quickly learn is that their parents have their own life and we have ours. Parents have their values, we have ours. And quite frankly, ours is better. When those children reach adulthood, they go out into the world, what do they expect? Well, they expect to be able to live their own lives the way they did at home. They expect to be able to play however they choose safely. They expect to be able to express values indigenous of, well, themselves. They're not stupid. They know how to live. But look around. Clearly they don't. The subtle, heretical, because we refuse to admit it, message is clear. Women are not safe around men who have no objective moral values. And the moral strength to live out those values when nobody's looking. So in a workplace dominated by men, women are at risk. In a co-equal workplace, women are at risk. Are men and women equal? Only in the eyes of the law. Men clearly are larger, stronger, and overtly oriented toward sex. They have to be trained not to express it. And women are still the weaker sex and vulnerable in any environment that contains uncontrolled men. We used to recognize this and act accordingly. Today, we're just interested in being equal. We are sacrificing being safe. I went into the workaday world out of high school in 1961. I have run into very few people in the last 10 years who know anything about 1961. My first job was in a glass house, anchor hocking. And I remember, 18-year-old kid, I remember how shocked I was to see how the women were acting around men. I was equally shocked to see how the men interacted with the women. Lots of sexually charged joking, even a fair amount of touching. And the women did not seem to be outdone by the men. That was 57 years ago this month, October. All I can say is we've come a long way, baby. The culture at large has become overtly crude, rude, and indecent. You are aware of how our senators and representatives are acting today, right? Men and women charged with the most important jobs in our nation. Men and women who know the law and have sworn to uphold it. Men and women apparently willing to abandon both that law and civility in the face of the greatest threat to civilization yet. A man who would sit on the highest court of the land, who actually believes in objective truth and biblical morality. We can't have that. At stake is whether or not a woman has the right to kill her unborn baby, a baby she conceived without regard to the consequences of her actions, a baby she could have prevented with just a little self-control and forethought. But the message today is, I'm free. I can live any way I please and not reap the reward of my actions. And anybody who tries to take that away from me, well, they're the enemy. And the Bible? What about the Bible? One of the most hated verses in the Bible is Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. A verse that says, whatsoever a man or a woman sows, that shall he also reap. And the context for this? God is not mocked. He will not be mocked. Today he is patient for a purpose. One day he will be the judge of the universe, and it will be an unbiased court. We will get what we deserve. Some of us who call ourselves Christians will get what we don't deserve. Heaven. And everybody else will get what they deserve. And reading what that is in the Bible, I have to believe that everybody will be shocked out of their socks. An eternity with no appeal and no relief. I can't imagine such a thing. And most people can't. But the God haters, the God deniers among us, they say it must not be true because I can't imagine it. They have become their own gods. And we're heading downhill from there. It was a cheery little update, don't you think? I have an article here that I want to share with you about a feminist advice to women. Here is a distinguished associate professor at Georgetown University Law School, and she is sharing a little something with us that apparently women ought to take heart. This is the Bible Forum. It is Sunday night, October 7th, 2018. We're in the midst, historically, in choosing or recently conferring a Supreme Court justice. We're being told that he will be sworn in tomorrow evening in the White House in a ceremony. But the reality is he was sworn in just over 30 minutes after the final vote was cast on Saturday. In case something happens, I suppose. In harmony with that is a feminist advice to women. It's a tweet posted by someone called Christine Fair, a woman who is a distinguished associate professor at Georgetown University Law School. And after sharing a video of Senator Lindsey Graham, he's a Republican from my now home state of South Carolina, during last Thursday's Senate Judiciary Committee hearing relative to Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, she wrote, quote, "Look at this chorus of entitled white men justifying a serial rapist's arrogant entitlement. All of them deserve miserable deaths, while feminists laugh as they take their last gasps." End of quote. That from the fairer sex, from the women who live above it all, who are not like these ugly men. Suffering some backlash from the tweet, this lady doubled down. She said, "I will not moderate my rage for your convenience. As a victim of assault, I alone, with millions of women, watch white males gather around a belligerent predator defending his and their privilege. I will use words that will make you as uncomfortable as I am. I hope women understand that we are all rapeable. Just because you shill for the patriarchy doesn't make you immune. We are all potential victims every day, and I hope it's clear to all that American patriarchy doesn't care and views abusing us as a perk." I think the sentiments pretty much speak for themselves, don't you? This is a form of the battle cry of women of all ages who are finally standing up against the violence against them. The problem is, they have been conditioned to believe that all of this is about male domination. Domination which does exist, by the way. But what they don't understand is that male domination is largely not the problem. It's a concept that made its way into this week's Senate Judiciary Committee hearings for the next U.S. Supreme Court justice. But the reality is that all of this is the logical, some would say purposeful, result of the 60s sexual revolution. It was during that time when women were freed to have recreational sex. They were given pills, birth control pills, that would keep them from getting pregnant. They weren't told that those pills would damage their vascular system, and if they had a tendency toward varicose veins, they would have a worse case. It was a time when fashions emphasized the female form in dramatic and often explicit ways. Remember Laugh-In? Could Goldie Hawn's bathing suit have been any skimpier? Little skinny woman, hardly anything on, and they'd flash to her up on a pedestal doing whatever that dance was called. A time when rebellion against all forms of authority was praised, encouraged. When the music, the movies, the television programs, The college campuses were alive with social, rebellious themes and attitudes. When the family structure was being shattered morally in terms of authority as well as attitude. The genesis of where we are now. 40 plus years later, 2 generations down the road, the 60s radicals now have grandchildren who are raising children. Largely, they don't know where these children are except when they're asleep. And that's most times at home, but not always. These parents don't know who is crafting their child's worldview, except that clearly it's not them. These parents have no idea what the educational system is feeding them. Earlier tonight, I shared what college students think about Christopher Columbus. Check the video. It's the first one in the series this week. These parents have no idea who the God of the Bible is, nor why any of that matters. For them, church is only for those who actually go to church. And it's simply an extension of popular entertainment today called the contemporary church. People come, they dress as they please. They don't have to join the church. They don't have to make any commitments to the group. They just come or they don't. And when they come casual, and they expect to see a show. People, it's 18 or 20 people on stage with instruments and microphones, entertaining them for 15 or 20 minutes. They expect to be able to stand up themselves and sing some of these choruses and have a good time. They expect to see somebody come out on the stage dressed like they're gone to a picnic or something and pontificate about whatever they choose to talk about that, may or may not be pointed in any way, but is certainly not preaching. You do know what preaching is, right? Preaching is that. On my website, there's a picture of me doing that with this shirt on. What is that? Preaching is propositional. It says you need to pay attention. You need to learn something here, and you need to respond to it by changing something in your life, making it more like God, more like what the Bible says. That's preaching. Something you will never find in a contemporary church today. You won't find it in most charismatic churches. You definitely won't find it in liberal churches or in the Roman Catholic Church. Preaching is passé. Nobody wants to hear it. Who wants that in their face? So how is all this playing out? Well, today, abortion on demand is an inalienable right. That's what the Kavanaugh hearings were all about. He now is the visible illustration of how the court can do away with abortion on demand. The dominant group is conservative. They don't believe in this stuff. Now they can't just go in and say, well, let's change the law. It has to come up. And the liberals know full well it's coming up. It'll come up a whole lot faster than you think it will. It'll come up 100 different ways until finally it has to be dealt with by the court. And they're frightened that in the course of it, these guys, I don't think any of the gals at this point, these guys will change it. See, they're sexist. They are so adamant, they're willing to take to the streets to defend their right to kill babies. For them, sexual activity is recreational, and abortion is a human right. Today, music is just another form of drugs, and art is only good if there's a naked woman in it. or a symbol of something that only the artist understands. And when we come to politics, we can already see our future. We're going to be another banana republic where professional politicians using sophisticated techniques get elected in order to further their ideals, their careers. And the street decides what's important for now. The demonstrators are out there to say, we want this. 6 weeks they'll be out there saying, we don't want that anymore. And it'll all change. This is our moral context in a post-Christian America. A context, an America where all things moral are arbitrary, where all things that deal with us are self-indulgent. We are a drug-laced society, prescription and otherwise. And the drug merchants are out every day telling you what they have that will help every single thing that's wrong with you, or even if you just think it's wrong with you. And as one who has read the PDR, the Physician's Desk Reference, I can tell you there are drugs out there that if you read far enough down into the reactions to those drugs, you will find a couple different things. One is you may actually find that this drug can cause the very problem you're taking the drug to eliminate under certain circumstances. You may find this drug can actually destroy you in meaningful ways. Not in the first 10 or 20, way down here. It's a good possibility. And they all cost a lot of money. If you just ate healthy, got some exercise, probably do just as well in most cases. It's an arbitrary, self-indulgent, drug-laced, immoral in the extreme, can you say transgender? An addictive society. It's spinning out of control. Why? Simply because we have cut ourselves loose from our moorings. We are now adrift, morally, socially, spiritually, and every other way. Adrift is just another word for out of control. It's going to get worse. The Bible points to a day when God will step in to stop it because it's that bad. As I grow older, and I'm not sickly right now, so I think I'll grow a little older, I honestly think I'll live long enough to see it. That's how bad it is. But believe me when I tell you, it can get a whole lot worse. And I don't think it's going to get any better. Love to be wrong. Tell me where I'm wrong. There will be people who will. I find it interesting when I get comments of things that I've said. The people who have names I can't pronounce, or the people who, and there's usually like a little picture that pops up because it comes off Facebook or something, or the people who look like they're from another world, or they're charismatic, usually charismatic women. They're not bashful about telling me how terribly wrong I am. Some of them have wished horrible things upon me. When I hear from people who seem to be different from all of that, they actually either agree or they say, well, you know, something to think about. The noisy group is running the world. They're dominating everybody. The other group is the ones that are making the money, building the buildings and their families and all the rest of it. But sooner or later, this one's going to collapse, that one. My prophecy. I'm not a prophet. I want you to take a look. I wish we didn't do this. I was all excited about this. It was an article that developed during the week. little by little as it unfolded. This is all about the events in Washington. But I want to lay it down as kind of a benchmark. I want to walk through it, put it there, and then hopefully not have to come back to it again. There's another reason. The other reason is I have an opinion. And I like to share my opinions. I have an opinion about most things. But you know that, right? Yeah. I have an opinion about you. I love you. This is the Bible Forum. It's October 7th, 2018. Day before Columbus Day, I think. I'm not sure. We talked a little bit about Christopher Columbus earlier in the show. You want to go back and look at the first tape. There's some stuff in there. But tonight I want to talk to you and show you what a lawyer sees when he looks at Christine Ford's testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Have you ever been interrogated by a lawyer? How about a lawyer who makes her living prosecuting sex crimes? One who knows from experience when someone is either lying or trying to shade the truth just a little. Such a person is Rachel Mitchell. You saw her if you watched the hearings. Rachel Mitchell is the prosecutor who questioned Christine Ford on behalf of the Republican senators last week during the hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee. She's a career prosecutor from Arizona who specializes in sex-related crimes. She released a memo late on Sunday explaining why no reasonable prosecutor, her words, would bring a case against Brett Kavanaugh given the evidence that exists against him. She writes, "Cases like this are incredibly difficult to prove, but this one is more so. It does not satisfy the preponderance of evidence standard." And she offers a number of reasons, citing the confusion and the gaps in this woman's testimony. Number one, she said Ford has not offered a consistent account of when the alleged assault happened. She offered several paragraphs of illustration. I didn't want to bore you with all of that. Secondly, she says Ford has struggled to identify Judge Kavanaugh as the assailant by name. Again, 2 or 3 paragraphs of explanation. Thirdly, when speaking with her husband, Ford changed her description of the incident to become less specific. According to Mitchell, Ford told her husband before they married that she had been a victim of a sexual assault, but she told the Washington Post that she told her husband she was a victim of physical abuse. What is it? What is that? Difference without a distinction? Lawyers look at all of this. It makes a difference. She testified that both times she was referring to the same incident. Number 4, Ford has no memory of key details of the night in question, details that could help corroborate her account. For example, Ford does not remember who invited her to the party, or how she heard about it, or how she got there. She does remember whose house she was in when the assault occurred, or where the house is located with any specificity. She does remember, however, very specific details about that night, details that are unrelated to the assault, such as how many beers she consumed and whether or not she was on medication. Mitchell then offers what she considers the most significant hole in Ford's memory, the fact that Ford does not remember how she returned home from the party. It was, according to Ford, a 20-minute drive from her childhood home to where she was, and no one has come forward to say they were the driver that night. Ford remembers locking herself in a bathroom after the alleged assault, but cannot identify who drove her home. Both happened after. It was the days before cell phones, and yet Ford remembers running out of the house after coming downstairs, but not calling anyone before doing so. Number 5, Ford's account of the alleged assault has not been corroborated by anyone she identified as having attended, including her lifelong friend. And they have sworn under penalty of felony that they do not remember the party, nor any of the details that Ford related. Number 6, Ford has not offered a consistent account of the alleged assault. In the initial account, she remembers hiding in a bathroom after the assault. She testified that she heard no one, only assumed people were talking. In another account, she heard Kavanaugh and Mark Judge talking downstairs while she hid in the bathroom upstairs after the assault. In her remembrance shared with the Washington Post, there were only 2 boys in the room when she was assaulted. In Ford's letter to Dianne Feinstein, she said there were 4 people at the party besides her. Later, it was 4 boys and her female friend. One of the boys she initially identified as a bystander, but in her oral testimony, she said it was not accurate to call him a bystander. 7th, Ford has struggled to recall important recent events relating to her allegations and her testimony regarding recent events, all of which raises further questions about her memory. Ford cannot recall if she was recorded via audio or video during the administration of her polygraph, nor can she remember if the polygraph was administered on the same day as her grandmother's funeral or the day after. And Mitchell says it would have been legally and socially inappropriate to administer a polygraph to someone who was grieving. Ford's description of the psychological impact of the event also raises questions. Ford testified that she suffers from anxiety, PTSD, and claustrophobia, which explains her fear of flying. However, she testified that she has flown many times in the last year and flies on a regular basis for her hobbies and work. And a past boyfriend says they flew often in small aircraft around Hawaii, for example. Meanwhile, Ford testified that the assault affected her academically in college. However, she never claimed it affected her in high school, immediately after the assault allegedly occurred. It is significant, she says, that she used the word contributed when she described the psychological impact of the incident to the Washington Post, not caused, suggesting that other life events may have contributed to her symptoms. And when questioned on that point, she said that she could think of nothing as striking as the alleged assault. Finally, Mitchell said the activities of congressional Democrats and Dr. Ford's attorneys likely affected Dr. Ford's account. Some have wondered why the therapist's notes made in regard to Christine Ford and her memory of Brett Kavanaugh assaulting her when both were teens, why were those not released? If she told Congress and the nation her story last Thursday in an apparently convincing fashion, followed by Kavanaugh's passionate rebuttal, why would you withhold the notes? The therapy sessions may have been hypnosis, which would make any information derived from them inadmissible in court, Mitchell said. Her familiarity with the technique was confirmed in a 2008 research article on self-hypnosis in which she, Ford, is listed as one of several authors. The article explains how it is used to, quote, retrieve important memories, end of quote, or quote, recreate artificial situations, end of quote. Margot Cleveland is an adjunct professor at Notre Dame and a lawyer, and she posted a comment online October 1st of this year, just a few days after the Ford testimony. In this post, she reflects on one of Christine Ford's research articles in 2008, which included a study where participants were taught self-hypnosis. She went on to note how hypnosis can be used to retrieve important memories, quote, and create artificial situations, end of quote. Cleveland defended herself from critics who argued the point of the research was to address depression and processing difficult emotions, pointing out that Ford suffers from anxiety and PTSD, and using an artificial situation to process her feelings, thoughts, etc. increases risks of false memories, as does the hypnosis. This is something all human beings either know or should. It's about talking to yourself about events, people from within your own world of memory, imaginations, defenses, and so forth. The article goes on to talk about creating artificial situations, quote, that would permit the client to express ego-dystonic emotions in a safe manner, end of quote. Ego-dystonic refers to thoughts, emotions, feelings, behaviors, and so forth, which are contrary to or inconsistent with the rest of one's personality. It also explains how hypnosis can be used to let patients focus on certain aspects of an experience or of a memory. The idea is that reliving the experience helps you walk through the reparative process. Now keep in mind, hypnosis is very, very dangerous. It is dangerous spiritually. It is dangerous emotionally. Whenever a human being is able to shut off their conscious mind, they automatically open that mind to another mind that may be lurking about. Secularists, pagans, and others reject that sort of anthropology. For them, everything is natural, it's physical. And of course, they are either ignorant or they are closed to the idea that evil spirits exist and are at work in and through non-physical processes. Therefore, their anthropology is oriented toward the physical. But who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows. Some of you old enough to remember the show, radio program, 1930s. And so does the God who made us. It is man's sinfulness, selfishness, and arrogance that seeks alternative solutions to sinful attitudes and behaviors instead of confessing them, repenting of them, restructuring your life so they never happen again. Instead of going to whatever the authority is that could bring justice, we retreat inside ourselves and think we can handle it. We can't. We resort to drugs, alcohol, sex, hypnosis, and just about anything else that will keep us busy enough, distracted enough that we won't think about it. It's what helps them sleep at night. What helps you sleep at night? I find that if I confess my sins to God, I sleep better. Not talking about it anymore. Who's raising your children? You say, well, I'm raising my children. Well, many of you don't have any children anymore. Who raised the children you did have? And today, these young people, they're letting other people to do it. I don't know that. Maybe you didn't know that either. I grew up conscious in the very, very late 1940s and 1950s. I remember when television came on at 4 o'clock in the afternoon with Howdy Doody. I remember the television was not mine. I had to ask if I could turn it on. There were only certain things I could watch. Believe it or not, in 1954, 56, there were programs I wasn't allowed to watch. Too scary. Today, you don't know what your kids are watching. And most parents don't bother to check. My grandchildren come over here. They ask to use my computer. I immediately, if I'm not working, I shut off the Wi-Fi. And if I can't shut off the Wi-Fi, I disable it on the machine. But I also watch them as I walk by, see what they're doing. If I were a parent, I doubt my children would have a computer that could get online. But that is not the way parents think today. So the question is valid. Who's raising your kids? We'll talk about it. Where'd it go? You're on the Bible Forum. I have a question for you tonight. Who's raising your children? Jordan Peterson, who is a renowned Canadian psychology professor, best-selling author, knows that there are some dangerous people teaching our children in schools. In a video for Prager University, Peterson describes exactly what's happening with teachers, administrators, and students in today's society, and explains that some teachers and professors are bent on indoctrination. He says, quote, "You may not realize it, but you are currently funding some dangerous people. They are indoctrinating young minds throughout the West with their resentment-ridden ideology. They have made it their life's mission to undermine Western civilization itself, which they regard as corrupt, oppressive, and patriarchal." Peterson goes on to say that if you're a taxpayer or if you're paying for your child's liberal arts degree, you're underwriting a gang of nihilists. Nihilism comes from the Latin, meaning nothing. It's a philosophical viewpoint that suggests denial or lack of belief toward the reputedly meaningful aspects of life. Most commonly, nihilism is presented in the form of existential nihilism, which argues that life is without objective meaning, objective purpose, or intrinsic value, that life has no real foundations, no connections, no objective moral standards to tie it all together. Applied to morality, nihilists assert that there is no inherent morality and that accepted moral values are abstractly contrived. They vary depending on the culture, and they're created out of necessity, perhaps. Nihilism may also take the epistemological view. Epistemology talks about the origin, the nature, the limits of what we can know, or what we do know. It may take the epistemological form, or it may take the ontological. Ontology deals with where did it come from, or the metaphysical form, realities beyond what we can see, meaning respectively that in some aspect knowledge is not possible, and that reality may very well not really exist. Now consider the implications. Consider the ramifications of sitting in classes for hours, years, having this defined, illustrated, applied to every aspect of life by people you inherently respect, people you are paying to talk to you and teach you what they know. You're supporting ideologies that claim all truth is subjective. The author of this piece suggests that all sex differences are socially constructed and that Western imperialism is the sole source of all third world problems as one of those things, one of those philosophies that people are being taught today. When you see people in the streets railing against Western philosophies and ideals, how old are they? What you're seeing is what these teachers are teaching. How do we fight back? Well, in any battle, you need first to identify the source. What's the problem? And then you identify the ideas that are being taught by these people who are the problem. And thirdly, you realize that those ideas have consequences. And that in this context, these ideas will do to America what they have done to other Western nations and what they have already done to our universities. It is primarily Marxist theory in drag. Diversity, equity, inclusion. Sounds great. Moral. Above it all, intellectual. So how do you protect yourself? I want to offer you some solutions. Stop coddling your children. Stop doing everything for them. Teach them how to do it. Right. Stop giving in to their every desire. Pay attention to what they're asking and what the ramifications are. You're the adult in the room. Stop protecting them from life. Let them get hurt in a protected way. Let them see that if they do that, they get this. The progressives come along and they say when you have a sick child, it's like, oh my God, how could the world be constituted so that a child can unfairly suffer in this manner? I don't say that out loud, but that's what they're saying. The reality, human beings get sick. Many of them die. Why? That's life. To give a child the best preparation as a parent who knows how life is to be lived and how important it is and how dangerous it can be, that parent stays home and cares for their own children. You can't do that. We can't live on one salary. That parent stays home so you can imprint the values that your children will need instead of letting the daycare people imprint, and the teacher imprint, and the coaches imprint, and whoever else they run into that they seem to appreciate and respect. You stay home so you can teach them how to be strong. Peterson says, quote, you can't have them being vulnerable and cute and interesting and small and needing care at the same time striving to develop and grow without them also being prone to pain and destruction and vulnerability. Get used to it. And then what you do, he asks, you teach them to be strong. That's what you do. You don't get rid of the vulnerability. You teach them to be strong. You don't fix everything for them. You don't protect them from everything. In fact, you do a lot of the opposite. You expose them to as much of the world as you protectively can in a safe environment that you're providing them so that they see it. In the end, you make them strong. It's their strength that is the best antidote to their vulnerability. Why? Because life is hard, and then you die. If you're not strong, if you're not prepared, you're going to get eaten up by the culture. They're going to swallow you whole. You're going to be a little cookie cutter image of them. And in our world, it's worse, because our world is suffering a contamination from I can never say this word, malevolent, bad things. The optimistic part, Peterson says, is that you are so strong, you could not only deal with that, you can improve upon it. We're stronger than things are terrible, he says. A lot of this stuff he's talking about is biblical truth. If all we had to guide our life and the training of our children was the Bible, and we stopped adding our own thoughts and ideas and revisions to that Bible, the world, our nation, our community, our homes would be better in every way. Now do you understand why the Bible is so hated? The God of this world does not sleep, nor does he slumber. He is the enemy of your soul. You are in a battle. And you're a parent? You're in a battle for the very soul of your child. And yours. We don't get it. Bible prophecy time. Children, get out your Bibles. You need to put your Bible hat on. I haven't looked at this lately. You guys are not doing much talking over here. There's hardly anybody saying anything. Is that my fault? Or maybe it's just there's no women in. Oh, yes, there is. Sorry, Olga. Oh. Okay. So you think I'm on fire, huh? I don't know. I get to the point where I have more time. I'm going to be writing articles, posting them on all the websites. I have visions of going back through scripts that I've written and redoing stuff and just spending time doing all of that till I die. In the saga of my future, now we're pretty much convinced the computer's got a problem. Haven't been able to make the system work. And my boss doesn't understand it because he's been doing this for years. It always works. And mine don't work. I think he thought it was me. Now he's looking for a new computer. Because the things this thing is supposed to do, you can only get it to do half of it. And then when the next time you go in, it won't do anything at all. And if you take it all down and put it back up, you can get it. But the next time you go in, you only get half of it. And if you keep rebooting the computer, it just loses its mind. So we'll see. I hope this thing gets going soon. I don't want to be out in the cold. I don't like cold. I know I work in a van. It's, but I got to get out of the van every once in a while. I don't like that. Not that bad. Anyway, keep praying. My wife is up to the point where she's saying, "Are you sure God is in this?" And I said, "I think this is a test. I think gremlins are after this thing. I'm a born-again child of God. I don't think the devil can really attack me unless God allows for that. But physical things, I don't know. Sometimes these little mechanical boxes can have a mind of their own. I don't know. We'll see. We get the next computer, and if that don't work, I have no idea what to do, because he's going to have to buy back all this equipment, which he's not going to do. Anyway, I want to share a little bit of biblical prophecy with you, because I know you like prophecy. This is not a full-blown kind of a prophetic thing, but it's an interesting anticipation of fulfilled prophecy occurring now over in Israel. Stay with me. Welcome to the Bible Forum. Every Sunday night, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on thebibleforum.net. You can see this program. We're doing stuff, and it's new every week. Tonight I want to give you a little biblical prophecy. I want to show you some biblical prophecy that is being fulfilled right now. Going back in Israel's history, in the 25th year of Israel's captivity to Babylon, the prophet Ezekiel was presented with the pre-incarnate Christ, and he was taken on a trip. On this trip, he was introduced to a future Israel and a future temple. Beginning in Ezekiel chapter 40, he begins to write of this vision, a vision in which he was transported to Israel, where a divine messenger was holding a measuring rod. This messenger gives Ezekiel a tour of that temple, measuring the various walls, the gates, the courts, and so forth. In one scene, Ezekiel is treated to an earlier vision, chapter 10, that of the departing of the glory of the Lord from the temple. Then here in chapter 43 is the return of that glory to inhabit a new temple. Now, biblical scholars acknowledge that the temple vision, which occurs in the last 9 chapters of Ezekiel, presents special challenges in regard to its interpretation. Some have even described it as the most difficult passage in the Old Testament. Be that as it may, and it is, what Ezekiel saw was a renewed temple and renewed temple worship at a time future in Israel's history. At the end of the vision, Ezekiel 48:38, the angel, pre-incarnate Christ, no doubt, declares that the name of the city, Jerusalem, from that day, presumably forward, shall be called Jehovah Shammah. Literally, the Lord is there. Now, clearly that has not happened. Although Israel is very close to building another temple next to the Islamic Dome of the Rock, historically, biblically, that's where it has to go. Scholars have always argued the point because, we got this Islamic thing up there, there's not enough room. But now we have discovered, apparently, that there is room. Archaeologists have dug down below the wall and have found outside the gate, and they have found what appears to be another gate that was much lower down. and it was over to the right significantly that it can be directly across from a rebuilt temple. That's where it has to be. The Lord of glory enters through the eastern gate to the temple. All of this seems to point to the Great Tribulation and further on into the millennial reign of Christ. There being nothing left to occur in terms of biblical prophecy except the Great Tribulation. Currently, Israel is back in the land. She is the focal point of her enemies round about. Bible. She is dominating the region economically, scientifically, militarily, politically. And our current president is doing more to elevate and protect Israel than any president during our entire existence as a nation. All that in 2 years. All of this points to an impending crescendo of events already predicted, thereby already settled. Meaning that Israel will come under great attack by her neighbors. That the Western world will come to her aid. That all of this will occur in a time of great catastrophes, both human and divine. A time that is going to be marked by war and pestilence and famine and drought. By stellar catastrophe as 1/3 of the planet is destroyed. By gross demonic religion masquerading as Christianity or some such thing. By the deaths of 1/3 of the world's population. By the rage of Satan against God, and by 144,000 preachers of the gospel of the kingdom, Jewish men, virgins all. Men who win a multitude of people to Christ. They are not made Christians. Christians are gone. But they are won to Christ as believers. A group the Bible says no man can number. In the midst of all this are a number of auxiliary prophecies regarding events important to the purpose, not the least of which is the rebuilding of the Jewish temple, and, for this discussion, the desalinization of what the Bible simply calls the sea. Later on, the Romans called it the Dead Sea, because there's no life there. However, the Dead Sea was not always like that. In Genesis chapter 13, Lot looked out over the plain of Jordan, and the Bible says he beheld that it was well watered everywhere. Before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as it cometh unto Zoar. It was only after God's judgment of the 5 cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah being but 2, that the sea became deadly to animals and vegetable life. And it has stayed that way for thousands of years. But the Dead Sea today is anything but dead. More than 1,300 feet below sea level, the Dead Sea is home to all sorts of mineral wealth, as well as microorganisms and growing vegetation. The mineral wealth provides income for a number of industries. Still, it's not alive like the oceans or the freshwater seas. But the Bible indicates one day it will be. In the same passage that speaks of the temple of Israel that Ezekiel saw, he saw the door of the house, talking about the temple, and behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house, heading eastward. The house standing toward the east, the front of the temple, faces east, and the waters come down from under the right side of the house at the south side of the altar, going down to the desert and into the sea. A sea which being brought forth life as the waters are healed. Ezekiel 47. We're getting a glimpse of all of this today. The Dead Sea is marked by what is called hypersalinization. The environment is 37% salt, almost 10 times saltier than the ocean. And there is a tremendous scarcity of any form of aquatic life. But the Dead Sea is anything but really dead. An Israeli photographer by the name of Noam Badin writes about the Dead Sea Revival Project, calling it the eighth wonder of the world. He says in the Dead Sea are large sinkholes that were discovered in 2001. The floors of these sinkholes are carpeted with microorganisms. And on the sea's shore, presumably around these sinkholes, are fish and algae. Badin has witnessed fish in the Dead Sea sinkholes, microorganism growing vegetation, for several years. Millions of visitors come to the Dead Sea every year seeking life through the body of water's high oxygen levels and special minerals. And the great concern from this group of scientists that is in question here is that the water is being diverted from the Sea of Galilee and consequently from the Jordan River for agricultural purposes. If that were to cease, the water would come down to the Dead Sea and it would begin to live again. Along with the evaporation that caused the Dead Sea mineral works. So you've got a yes and no, a good and bad. Yes, the water would come back and life would return, but this industry would go away. He maintains that it is mankind that is keeping the Dead Sea from regaining life. They can see all this because the Dead Sea has these sinkholes, underwater sources seeping up fresh water. And this fresh water is meeting the sediment layers and it's melting the sediment. The result is the sinkholes have a salt content that's less than 1.5%. It's water you could drink, and it's water that will support life. What the fresh water from under the door of the temple will do during the millennial reign of Christ, nature is already signaling. Were the Jordan not limiting the amount of fresh water reaching the Dead Sea, were the Sea of Galilee not being hindered from discharging fresh water downstream, perhaps the Dead Sea wouldn't be so dead today. But of course it will remain so. It is a testimony. It is a marker. The 5 cities of the plain, one of which was called Sodom. Sodom for the evil behaviors that marked those cities. But one day, when Jesus is in charge, life will return to that which is dead, in this case water. But concerning animal life, the Bible indicates that not one, presumably no animals, will die during the great millennial reign of the Prince of Peace. We call all of this sort of thing lessons in nature. Subtle and not so subtle lessons regarding God, Jesus, sin, judgment, and salvation. Interesting story. Lots of stuff going on. We have run to the end of our tether. It is 10 o'clock on Sunday night here in drizzly Charleston, South Carolina. I keep watching the thermometer, the weather forecast, and we're going to have it. We had 90s last week. We're going to have high 80s. But after Thanksgiving, and definitely after Christmas, I'm going to have to put a coat on. Not looking forward to that at all. But come March, it comes back again. There's hope. And there's hope that we'll get together again next week, next Sunday night. I trust you'll be here. I'll be here. And we will see what other kinds of things we can do together. You got stuff you'd like to talk about, let me know. We'll stick them in the hopper. If not, well, that's okay too. I don't really lack for things to talk about. You behave yourself. Stay well. Love you.